All right, well, it is officially 7:30, so I'm going to call to order the Concord Municipal Light Board for January 12th. And I think we're almost all here. Pam is not here, but we have a quorum, so we will obviously, oh, Pam's here. Great, I see you, Pam, thanks. All right, okay, so with that, just a reminder in the agenda, you have our upcoming meetings. February 9th is our next meeting. If anyone has a concern or can't make it, please let me know. We have no minutes for review today, so I realize that we're behind on the minutes, but we will catch up and hope to have more minutes for approval to the board prior to our next, distributed to the board prior to our next meeting, and hopefully they'll be approved for February. For today's meeting, I just want to give two quick updates. I know we're going to get to these agenda items, but one is a year ago, and we voted as a board for some goals for the board, one of which was education on time of use rates. So today on the agenda, there's an item called rate design philosophy. This is just the beginning of several discussions we're going to have around rates. My goal for today is that all board members become grounded in the existing rates and that we walk through them. And as we go through them, remind ourselves where there were issues in our rate design that as a result of our cost of service study and the Baker-Tilly study, we felt there was some opportunities for improvement. We will also have in future meetings more detailed discussions on time of use rate design. And ultimately, you know, this is all aiming toward our long-term strategy of getting time of use rates in place across our rate structure. So this is a long process. It's going to take a lot of discussion. So this is just the beginning of that discussion over the next couple months. So just want to clarify that for the audience, and I know we'll talk about it a little bit later. Obviously, also on the agenda is the school building project. The town meeting article will be, town meeting is January 20th. I expect the board will need to give a statement at that meeting. There were some discussions at the public hearing that I did not make because Amanda made a presentation in advance and pretty much said the same thing, but we'll talk about the board's position on that and talking points as we get to that agenda item later in the meeting. So with that, let's proceed with our agenda. Dave, you want to start with your update?
Sure. So if the DPU approves the IOU's 2022 to 24 energy efficiency plan, Mass Save will begin to offer heat pump rebates to Concord households that currently heat with natural gas, but switch to heat pumps. Mass Save will provide rebates of $10,000 to $15,000 for air source and ground source heat pumps used as a home sole source of heating, and $1,250 per ton of capacity for air source heat pumps used for partial home heating if integrated controls are installed. 0% interest loans for heat pumps adoption will be available to these households. Mass Save will also provide generous air source and ground source heat pump rebates to businesses that currently heat with gas. The decision by the DPU is expected by the end of January, and rebates would cover systems installed anytime after January 1st. The availability of Mass Save funds for conversions of heat pumps and natural gas heating homes and businesses in Concord will enable Concord to offer the same rebates to oil heating homes and businesses as reflected in our 2022 energy management expenditure forecast. We received a Drive EV purchase incentive application about once every 2 weeks since the program began in mid-September. Almost 40% of those applications have been from households with incomes less than 120% or less than 80% of Boston metro area median income. Lower income households have received rebates of $450 to $1,000 to help offset the buy of an EV. In terms of operations, we've updated our protocols as it pertains to COVID. We've transitioned employees that can effectively work remotely full-time remote for 2 weeks. Started last Monday, and we're going to reevaluate it on Friday, and potentially extend it for a week or two. We have our engineering group rotating every other week right now, just trying to make sure we can maintain operations. It's worked all right. We have had some COVID cases within the staff, and we've been able to work around that. So been an eye on that and adjusting as we need to. On January 3rd at about 4 o'clock, we had a power outage along Main Street between the block and Old Road and 9 Acre. The cause of the outage was a failed underground cable at the intersection of Main Street and Route 2, which was on a riser pole. Once we identified the failure, we isolated and restored power in the West Concord area, basically from the plaza to Route 2, and the section from Route 2 to Old Road and 9 Acre remained off while we made the repair. That repair was made and tested. We restored power, and that occurred just after midnight. Working with our switchgear manufacturer, hospital switch, identified all the materials needed for permanent repairs. The materials have been ordered. They haven't been received yet, but they are on order, and we have hired the manufacturer to make the repairs since that's their specialty. The MS RFPs are due on the 25th of January, and we've been working with a consultant on the evaluation criteria. So more to come on that, and Brian will be sending me that when it's ready, but we're getting there. The last piece, after 24 years of dedicated service, our line supervisor, Ted Barkis, has announced his retirement, effective January 31st, 2022. I've been fortunate to work with Ted for all of those years, and it's been nice for me to see him progress through. He's been an employee, and we want to wish him the best in his retirement. And that's my update.
Great, appreciate that. And it's amazing the tenure that your team has, Dave, when they stay that long. And of course, that means you have another opening on your team as well, right?
We do, and Joe and I are working on that. But we hate to see Ted go, but he certainly earned it.
Yep.
A quick question: the control system that you said will go in with the heat pumps. Do you have any more details on that? Is it under Concord Light's control or under the state's control?
I'll have to get you more details on that. I'll check in with Jan, but it's an integrated control system, and I don't know who has control of it, but I'll find out for you.
Great, thank you.
Good question. Thanks, Brian. All right, so no questions. Let's move on in the agenda. I think next is our financial update. And Matt, I know you sent materials out in advance, but I assume you're leading this next topic. Thanks.
Yep. Good morning. So I sent out a set of financial statements to you guys, to the board on Monday, and then the public will be able to see these financials with the minutes, along with the minutes. I'll try to be really quick. Let me know if you have any questions. Really quick, going through the summary page. Obviously, the big one, the first thing that stands out is unrestricted cash going down almost $4 million. That's really just a product of our what's happened through our operations, as well as more money being sitting over with E&E to pay for future power supply. Our restricted cash has gone up almost 1.5 million. So that's good. We've got some funds that we can spend on undergrounding and other capital and stuff like that. There was an increase in our AR from September to September. I think this is just kind of a timing thing. I checked, and by December, our AR will have gone down, I believe, below the September 2020 value. This time I added down at the bottom, sales per kilowatt and cost per kilowatt. It just takes our sales dollars divided by, or sales volume divided by sales dollars to give you a price per kilowatt hour. So you'll see the amount we charged through September for each year went up in 2021, and then there was a small increase in the cost per kilowatt during that period. The last bit, the very bottom one, is the one that we always look at, or it's been scrutinized lately, the number of broadband customers. We had an increase of 65 over the prior year. And then any questions on that?
I just have a question. The metric of sales per kilowatt and cost, does the industry track those same metrics?
Well, I know that the as far as like the 17 cents here, that would be what we would be compared to whenever we do these rankings on rates. That's essentially what they're going to be looking at, is the average cost, I believe. Is that right, Dave?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, they sort of do it by size of customer too, right? So, okay.
And I supply the APPA with various metrics every year so that they can, rank us and stuff like that. They put out a book every year with averages.
Oh, Matt, I have a quick question. So the cost per kilowatt hour, is that just power supply? I missed when you described your process for calculating that 10-cent number.
Yeah, so it is just power supply.
So is it fair to say that per kilowatt hour it costs, what is it, 6.5 cents to operate the light plant? In very high level round numbers.
Yes.
Okay.
The reason I hesitate is because
There's a lot of caveats to that, I'm sure. Yeah, whether it be the payment in lieu of taxes, whether it be, what are fixed contracts for variable expenses, things like that. Yeah. Okay. But it's a ballpark.
Yep. Just a really quick math calculation just for reference.
Could you highlight that?
See trends.
Could you
What's that?
highlight that, Matt? I read it as 10 cents
Oh,
per kilowatt hour,
yeah,
not
Gordon,
6 cents.
I was taking the 10 cents away from the 17 cents.
Okay.
Because the 10 cents is our cost to procure electricity and distribute it or get it to the substation. And then everything else about what Concord Light does, which is maintaining poles, wires, salaries, and things, is that additional gets you up to that 17 cents.
Cool. Thank you.
It's an important thing to understand for when we talk about solar and renewable energy and sharing energy across the network.
So Brian, let me just ask, so you're saying the cost per kilowatt sold is actually, cost per kilowatt hour is actually 7 cents, because the additional 10 are the cost of operations.
Cost is the difficult thing to define. So the 10 cents is what it costs to generate, transmit, and capacity. That's power supply. But the 17 cents includes actually distributing it from the substation to the house, the salaries, the operations, the pilot, so much else. All the complexity is in that other 6.5 cents. I think
so if our rates are set properly, that 17 cents minus the 10 cents should cover everything else besides the cost of power.
Correct.
Okay, that was a question. Thanks.
So I'll move on to the financial statements. I'm gonna go to the top. I provided a balance sheet summary on a summary level that includes light plant and broadband. And then the second page is a 3-year comparison. I think it seemed like the board really liked this, where it shows year over year over year for all the same time period. I don't have a whole lot to talk about here. I just wanted to point out that this looks even more drastic than the summary page. And the reason for that is this 1.9 million. In between the 2020 and 2021, we transferred 1.9 million from electric to telecom and then established loan, a payback period. And then the other thing I thought I'd point out is this trend in our debt is really good. We've been paying down. We have not been adding new debt, which I think is great. As well as our pension liability dropped off about 600,000, which is great. And then I'll move to the same report down here. For revenues, this is electric. Our base revenues have gone up over 2 million over the prior year. I think that's all I had. Does anybody have any questions on the financial statements?
No, just to recognize it's still 3/4 of the year, right? And so that cutoff can vary year to year. And some of those wood buckets of, the outstanding AR, for example, might differ because of just the cutoff, right?
Yeah.
So,
Correct.
yeah.
But each of those is a 12-month period, right?
No, so this would cover a 9-month period from January 1st of 2021 to September 30th. January 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2020. So it's just those 9 months, the first 9 months of the year.
And degree days differ too, right? So, yeah. But yeah, thanks, Matt. I love this 3-year comparison. It's good to know. I particularly like the year-end one, but this is good too. It's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the bottom line summary, excuse me, the bottom line summary is that we're about $2 million in a better position this year than we were last year. Because last year we had a loss. So 2020 was a loss come December. And we always target the 2% net return. And I'm reading here that the net loss is a positive value of $2.8 million on page 6.
Go to that, yeah.
So this is for electric here. We're currently trending at a $2.8 million profit. No. Yes, profit for the year.
Which is normal.
Yes, that's right in line with what we'd like to see.
Right. So the increase in rates has brought us back to what would be like in 2019 or 2018 versus the 2020 where we missed our target.
Yes.
Which is why we did the cost of service study, right? So,
yep.
Right.
And we knew we would take a dip in 19/20.
So that's all I had.
Any other questions from the board?
If you
I'm
have,
assuming that the increase in customers on the broadband side is the backlog that we've been addressing. There are 65. Increase in number of new customers.
Yeah, right. Yep.
And
I
we
would
still
say
haven't
most-
made it through the end of the backlog, right?
Oh yeah, we're a ways from that, I believe.
Yeah.
And if you have questions that you think of after, feel free to email Matt and myself and we can get back to you.
All right, well, thank you. Well, speaking of questions, we'll move on to the next topic, which was the 2022 budget, or forecast, I should say, that we reviewed in our last meeting. And the board was asked to send any questions to Matt in regards to that presentation. I don't know, Matt, if there were questions that you received that are worth reviewing at all.
I actually didn't receive any questions. I did want to point out the one question that I believe Wendy, you asked last time, which is the first slide. You asked about this, the municipal medium and large kind of look like they fluctuate and don't jive with the prior year. And I did some digging on this, and the reason for the fluctuation is one of our municipal customers, I think it was the BD Center, switch from a large municipal to a medium municipal. For most of 2020, they were a large, and then they flipped down to G2 or M2, I should say. And so I was going to explain too, I got a clarification on this from Carol. The system checks every month. And I believe it's based on demand. It calculates demand, and that's what dictates what level what category they're charged in. So I hope that makes sense.
Follow accordingly as well.
What's that?
Does that follow with the rate classification too for our G?
Yeah, exactly. So every month there's customers that kind of flip in and out of different categories.
All right. Well, thank you for the explanation. I'm still a little curious on why then the large increased again for our forecast for 2022. If BD stays in the medium category. But you know what, I understand it's a classification thing as it relates to the forecast. I'm okay with that. Just interesting to know.
I believe that I took 2020 usage and then just multiplied it by the rates for 2022.
Okay.
I wasn't kind of concerned about the individual buckets, is more concerned with the overall
Okay.
of municipal.
Okay. All right, that would explain it. Okay. All right.
And then I just put together the summaries for electric and telecom if we want to look at them. So I don't know if there were any other further questions that we wanted to ask, or how I wanted to proceed.
Let me ask the board, are there any questions? I know I went through this before, so I don't have any additional questions.
I don't.
Okay.
No, I don't.
Don't
Thank
see
you.
anything?
I don't have any questions. I'm good.
Great, great. Okay, well, we do need to approve the forecast, so I would entertain a motion to do that.
So you'd be recommending the approved budget to the town manager, is what you're looking at.
Yep.
So I move that the board recommend this forecast to the town manager.
I second it.
Brian and Pam, thank you. Any discussion? Nope. Okay, so we'll take a roll call. Alice,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Gordon,
Yes.
Pam,
Yes.
and Wendy's a yes. So that's a unanimous vote of support. So thank you very much. And Matt, thanks again for a great presentation. Really appreciate you, the presentation and improving it year over year. So thank you. And we'll look forward to your future quarterly updates.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Great. All right, so moving along in our agenda, the next topic is the middle school solar project. So Dave, I'm going to turn this over to you for an update. And I don't know, I saw Amanda here. I don't know if she's playing a role today in our presentation or discussion.
Yeah, you know, there's a bunch of pieces. As I mentioned before, we've done the feasibility design to maximize the site. That was the first step. You guys have seen that. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made along the way. you know, it will have board impact in terms of financials and our approach. And so we did a cost estimate based on numbers that were available. We fully expect those numbers to fluctuate as prices come down, but it was a ballpark. We don't know the exact size that we're going to plan to propose going forward. So, you know, it could be maximized. It could be, you know, just the roof. It could be just the canopies. Those are decisions that need to be made along the way. And we've been waiting on that until the special town meeting. So we don't want to sink a lot of cost into it until we know that town meeting approves the project in general. But, you know, there are some things that the board's going to need to look at as we go along. And so first is, you know, do we do a bond for the solar? You know, and that's something that would require a town meeting vote at a future meeting. So something that we're going to have to talk about going forward. You know, some other options would be a PPA option, which, you know, we could do. We'd have to structure the PPA so that we got the SRECs. And so we'd want to be able to call that clean energy. And, you know, if we didn't have the SRECs, we know the solar provider is going to sell them. And that wouldn't be in the interest of what the community is looking for. So we have a couple things there that we know we're going to need some decisions. I think one of the things that the board needs to think about today is, you know, do you want to provide a statement at town meeting about the solar? And my feeling is, yeah, you should for sure. And I think you guys should focus some of your discussion on that today, and you know, kind of go from there. The other issues with this decisions that we still need to make are, you know, is the system directly connected to, you know, our system, or does the part on the roof go through the school? And if it goes through the school, we have to figure out operationally how we do that, because we can't give the school free electricity. That's illegal. And so there's some tough decisions that we need to talk about going forward with this. But you know, that's kind of where we are with the project. Once you know, assuming town meeting approves it, then we'd go into the next phase of the project and really figure out what we need.
Dave, could I ask to confirm some knowns? Why don't we start there? So the solar CMLP will install solar at the middle school site. You know, yes. We don't plan to not install solar, because it is a desire of the community, whether or not. I mean, if we go for a bond issue and it fails at town meeting, then we won't.
Yeah, so the commitment was to do solar at the middle school as a CMLP project. And I've been operating under that guidance that it is a CMLP project. So that's the plan. I think the piece for me, you know, obviously going to need some board approval on costs when we get there, and that sort of thing. But yeah, that is the plan, Brian.
Okay,
Can I just ask a related question? So is it the term solar ready has been used? What do we mean by it will be our project? Is our intention to have solar installed at the outset, or to be ready to install solar when we have the financial or other wherewithal, depending on policy considerations?
So the project is net zero ready. That's the way it's in the article. And, you know, we've heard from the community the desire to have solar on there as early as possible. And, you know, that's the way I've been approaching it, you know, so, you know, expecting solar to be installed out there, you know, when the building's opened.
So
I think that that's, yeah.
So I just want to clarify, because Dave, I had the same conversation with Dave. So it's solar ready, There will be potential bonding that we need to go forward with. And if the worst case is we put bonding and it fails, the school can still go live without the solar. That's important, but it absolutely is our intention to support solar. I think the other issue is how much solar, because what people saw was a maximum solar. And I don't think we're ready to make a statement on exactly what solar is there. I think the intention for sure was to cover the solar that supports the school. And I'm not saying that we're not going to do it. I just think, to Brian's point about what we know, we need to be crystal clear on what we do know and what is still open as it relates to design, right, and funding, et cetera.
So I want to clarify Pam's question. She's hearing the words solar ready quite a lot from the building committee, because their role is to prepare it for CMLP. And that's what they're calling solar ready. So when you look at the funding request that's going to the town in the special town meeting and the vote, it's for being solar ready. It does not include solar. The reason is that CMLP will do the solar afterwards or towards the end of construction with a different funding mechanism. So that's why you're hearing solar ready quite a lot, is because the building committee is bringing the project to that point, so CMLP can pick up the baton and put it through the finish line.
If I may, that's very helpful. I think it's an incredibly vague concept in terms of our responsibilities, I gather, to be figuring out how to finance this. And tell me if I'm wrong about any of this, but I think there's a lot embedded in what Brian said, and thank you very much. Also, there's a lot, because of that, embedded in decisions we have to make. And I think that just sort of at the surface, there's a question of timing. When would this be ready? There's a question of the extent of it. How much solar would there be? And what do we do if there is no money forthcoming from the town? I mean, so I guess the bottom line is there's a lot packed in here. I think we don't know a lot that I really thank Brian for, we need to know what we know. And my sense is we don't know a lot. And what we don't know is, and this gets just a general procedural point, I mean, is that there's a lot of stuff there. And I continue to be, shall we say, disquieted by our sort of going at this rather late and slow as a board. These are big questions.
And I also, Pam, I agree, but I also think that we have time. So Dave, can I ask you to speak to clarify the question about solar ready? You know, people have used the term plumbing, but can you clarify and make a clear statement about that the public could understand about what solar ready means from the light plans perspective?
Yeah, so along the way, I've been very clear, I think, with the committee that at a minimum, the building and parking lot needs to have the conduits and pathways for solar, so that, you know, if a canopy is put up a year after the building, that the pavement's not dug up. So everything is supposed to have the necessary conduits in place and be solar ready. So that's the plan, and you know, that message, and that is part of the design. But
Yeah.
go ahead, Pam.
Part of being ready is also doing that planning. Sorry, let me do a quick clarification. So part of your planning, Dave, has been to reach out to SDMA and have that maximum solar design plan drafted so that we can have a concept of where these things will be located and how we prepare the site to be solar ready for the installation. It gives us a maximum, but it doesn't give us the detail of the exact roof space available because the building construction documents aren't done yet.
That's correct. And
But wouldn't it be useful for us to be able to determine before they do the construction documents, whether we're looking at a 1 megawatt or a 4 megawatt build out on the site?
well,
Because obviously that's very different and has cost implications for the building construction.
yeah, and
the intention of our hiring a consultant and collaborating with the school projects, et cetera, because I don't think we've had that conversation. And I think the board needs to know what sort of working assumptions we're working under from a CMLP perspective.
So,
Working
No.
assumptions, forgive me, but also variables we may not know entirely should be started to be talked about. And
Absolutely, Pam.
I don't mean to sound cantankerous here, but this project is huge for us in terms of messaging and content of solar for the whole town. And for example, I understand that things are formative, that we don't have a lot of information. I also just note that we are being asked right now to make a statement at a major town meeting and talking about it, sort of for the first time. So I think I will press to ask us as politely as I can to be framing these issues together all the way through and deliberately, and maybe having a critical path kind of discussion set up or something. But it's important. It's really important stuff, and we have a huge role apparently.
Right, no, PM, I don't want to disagree with you. I think we need to hear what David said, and he said it repeatedly in the last few months. We have not made significant investment or started any real design work until we're confident that this town meeting approval proceeds, right? The minute it does, I think our intention is to immediately start the proper design work and to do it in parallel sort of with the school design project. So I think there's a lot we don't know, and it all comes out of design work. So, we really shouldn't be speaking to details. I think the comment that we would make at town meeting is just that. And Amanda spoke to some of it in the public hearing, in that the light board has been not deliberately, but we've been waiting for the town meeting approval to proceed in earnest with our work as part of this. We feel confident that we have enough time to do that design work in conjunction with the school project and to deliver solar along with the building opening. So I think that would be sort of the concept of comments that I'd want to make. But before I proceed further, Dave, I want to go back to sort of your perspective on this and discussions we've had with Amanda, because the other thing I want to be clear about is that we absolutely should not talk about dollars necessarily, because it alarms people. And I think we should stick to the facts about what we know as a board at this point and what our next steps will be following the approval from town meeting, and funding obviously as well.
Thank you, Wendy. I agree with that.
Gordon has had his hand raised for quite a while.
It's bright, it's yellow. It's hard for me to see. Sorry, Gordon.
Okay, yeah. My question would be, the town meeting actually did already approve the school and a net zero energy profile for the school. Town meeting has already endorsed the idea of there being solar at the school. So what are we asking town meeting to approve this time around?
$100 million
The school
It's-
project.
to
What?
go ahead and spend the $100 million for the design that's currently out there.
Wait, and that's in the January 20th town meeting, right?
Correct.
Correct. And then
And-
followed by a townwide vote for the bonding
But
on February 3rd.
here's the thing and this is that in order to get the school project past the finish line, there have been a couple of sort of community agreed and embraced ideas that the proposal shouldn't exceed maybe $103 million, and that you need to exclude the solar piece from the capital planning in order to meet that $103 million bright line in the sand. So and that it's been that way since the project began, that the solar was explicitly outside of the school board's purview, which pushes it on us. But then we are saying, well, gee, there's nothing going on because they're not really doing anything with it. Well, they said from the beginning they're not going to do any part of the solar planning. So I kind of feel like as if maybe there should have been some effort on our side in parallel to the school building project to put things into perspective and you know, suss things out and so forth. And I don't really feel like as if that's what the January 20th town meeting is actually all about. That town meeting is about the school, not the solar project.
So Gordon, I completely agree. It's that, you know, the community isn't fully educated. They're very wedded and, you know, with good reason want solar there. And we are mixing the two. I think it's important that we still relay our intent to support solar because it's going to come up. We need to be ready to respond to that. But you're right, the school building, and I think the school committee has been very clear about what solar ready means and that that's the scope of their funding as it relates to solar. But that being said, we just need to be prepared to make a statement about what the board has done so far and what our intention is going forward. So I think we're all committed to the solar projects. It's the devil's in the detail to get there, right?
Yeah, and some of the problems I have with it is, and David just said it a second ago, like we can't charge zero for, right? So there's kind of an equity piece that needs to be sorted out.
And that's, as a board, those are all decisions we're involved in, right? The PPA agreement, how are we going to do the rating? How big is this going to be? And you know, there was a discussion around battery storage too. That's all part of our purview, and it's all detailed design work. We're just not ready to have those conversations, but we know we're going to have them, and that's the expectation, right? So that's our charge, and we're going to do it. So, I'm sorry, Pam, you were raising your hand, and Alice, you raised your hand too.
Well, okay, I'm sorry, and I really do really understand and respect the quandary. I'm not trying to be just difficult here. I don't know what our intent really is. If we had this, if somebody asked me on the street, what is the intention with respect to solar of the light board, I would not feel comfortable answering that question. So to the extent that you know what our intent is, I would like us to be playing from the same sheet of music. I also think that we should be, because of how complicated this all is and our responsibilities with respect to it, be having more regular discussions about this in our meetings. You know, I think I've asked that question before, and you know, Dave has said, and I respect Dave. You know, well, we'll tell you what we need to tell you when we need to tell you, and I'm not quite sure we're at the point where we should do that anymore. So 2 points. One, shouldn't we be talking about this on a more regular basis? And two, what is our intent if you, Wendy, seem to think you know what it is? Because I'm not sure I know exactly.
So good question. I think we're going to come back to that because we need to make a statement about it. I know, but let me get through people's questions. Alice, I'll ask you, and then Matt, I know you're there as well waiting. Alice?
Okay, thank you. So Dave, I know you had hired Solar Design Associates and you presented the rough schematics on the solar. Is it our assumption that they will continue being the consultant for the town developing the economic models? Because that's quite a big undertaking to do the economics of all the different options we have before us for us to make some decisions on. So will we be ready if this approved, if the school is approved on the 20th and voted on the 3rd? Are we ready to just start working with Solar Design Associates, or do we have to go out to bid and start over?
So that excuse me, that was my intent, was to continue to use SDA. We've used them in the past, and we have a good relationship. They've done good work for us. You know, they're familiar with the project. They've been working with the school as well. So I would want to continue that, and that would require approval from the town manager to continue down that path. But I think that's the right approach.
Right. Thank you. A follow-up question to that is that obviously there's a lot of anxiety and excitement about solar on the middle school. There's a lot of expectation in town. I'm wondering whether it's appropriate for this board to decide today that we should add another meeting each month just to focus on all the decisions and all of the metrics that we need to be considering on the solar project for the school. I know we've included it in these meetings. We've asked for this to be on the agenda for each meeting, but it becomes a good focus of the meeting. And once we entertain citizen comments to it, I think we hear even more. I'm just wondering if it's appropriate and for us to add another meeting in the month. And I think the same question may come up when we start discussing time of use rates, because that will occupy most of any of our meetings.
Thanks, Pam. I think it's a good question. I think we may need to, but let me just ask Dave a follow-up question and then have him speak to the timing of what we're going to know and when. So Dave, can you also clarify, because this was my question that we talked about, to the degree we need to proceed with design work, what funding do we have and do we need a warrant article to support design work? I think your assumption is that we might not need to, but can you clarify that statement? Because that's also the board needs to be aware of.
Yeah, so design work, I don't think we would put that on a borrowing. It would be something that would be covered out of the operating funds. So I wouldn't have an intent to do design work and fund it through borrowing. The construction and materials would be what we'd be looking to bond if we did that and went down that path. If we went through a PPA, obviously that's a different scenario, and that's basically monthly charges, just like any other purchase power agreement.
So just a follow up on that. So design work, but actual borrowing for the installation, assuming we're not doing a PPA, we have the opportunity for funding, but that wouldn't be until a year from April, May for that funding approval. We would still be in line with the school project to be able to deliver solar in line with the opening of the building.
Yeah, yeah, that shouldn't be an issue. The only concern I'm hoping things straighten out over the next 12 months is the supply chain. You know, we've been seeing a lot of things significantly delayed, but I do believe we have a good window that we should be able to have the array up when the school's built. But you know, I just want to put that out there that supply chain is a little bit messed up right now.
Right, and then so Dave, in terms of the question about more frequent meetings, I don't think we know enough immediately right now to start any bi-weekly meetings for that board. In terms of Alice's question around needing to start meeting more frequently as it relates to the design of solar at the school.
No,
What about regular agenda items?
Well, we're going to cover that too. The question is, do we need additional meetings pushed mainly because of the school building project? I want to answer that question.
Thank you.
I think as we get into it, there could be a need to meet, you know, just have a focused meeting on solar going forward. I don't think we're there just yet, but that's really, you know, up to you guys to discuss and decide what to do as a board. I'm supportive of having an extra meeting to talk about stuff like that if need be. I don't know that we're there just yet. You know, we are early in the project, right? It's not even approved at town meeting yet. So I don't know that I'm prepared for an extra meeting every month yet. We will be. I think there's going to be a need for that because there are, as I mentioned early on in my comments, there's a lot of decisions to be made on how we move forward with this.
Thank you, Dave. Alice, I'm going to wait. I'd like to actually ask Matt to speak. His hand's been up for quite a while.
Yeah, so Matt Johnson, Select Board Liaison, and I just wanted first to speak to what's ahead of you for this January 20th meeting. So actually on the agenda, there is not a slot specifically for the Light Board to speak. There will be statements made by both the Select Board and the Finance Committee. And then there is an opportunity for other interested boards to make a statement of up to 2 minutes. So that is, I think, you know, the opportunity that you have here. And I would, just as your liaison, encourage you to take that up, I think, as you're discussing right now. And the reason is because at the public hearing, I think that it was almost exclusively the questions asked from the public were relative to this aspect of the project. I think there might have been one or two stray questions, but most were about this. And there were really two perspectives, I think, from a broad point. One is that from the point of view of those that are concerned that the project actually fulfill the vision of a net zero, building, realizing that the building itself, the project that's being funded, is just net zero ready. And the second perspective is one of, I think, those that are financially concerned that this aspect of the project to actually provide the solar will effectively increase the cost of the project well beyond the 100 million. And so they're wondering, well, what are we not seeing yet in terms of cost? And so there were also a little more detailed questions about, I think, relative to that, hey, we should use a PPA and all that stuff. But I think the challenge that you have is that you really can't and shouldn't make those kinds of detailed decisions yet. It doesn't take as long to put in a solar array as it does to put in a school. And the rate environment, subsidies, cost of panels, the supply chain, all of those elements are going to change dramatically between now and when you would really need to begin to do this. And so really, for the meeting next week, it's really, as I think has been stated before, more a reiteration of the commitment that the board has. At least that's my perspective, and I just wanted to share that as your liaison.
Matt, thank you. I think just to reaffirm, it is our intent to make this statement. We need to, but it's good to know that there's not time slotted for that. Can I ask one question? And maybe I should ask Dave or Amanda this. In the public hearing, Amanda made a presentation on solar. Is there some expectation that Amanda would do the same in the school building project?
No, and again, at the town meeting, the special town meeting, the presentations will be more brief than they were at the public hearing, and that's always the case.
Okay,
There's an explicit time now. I mean, you could talk to the building committee chairs to see if you want to include any content, but they will be under time pressure.
Okay, and I'll just remind the board that Amanda made a presentation and made many of the statements that we're talking about here today about really reaffirming our goals, but just talking next steps. So I'm going to go back. I see many hands raised right now. I'm going to go back in the order that I saw them raised. Alice, I'm going to go back to you. You have your hand raised.
Okay, I just want to make sure that everyone here is under the same assumption. The budget that we just approved for 2022, and that will be going to town meeting in the spring, does not include a line item for any of the things that we're talking about on the solar design or the studies, the economic studies that will be needed to make decisions, because we have that money in other places in our budget. So just making sure that we see that 2022 does not provide a line item for the solar project per se. That's just a clarification.
So I think it's a good question. I think, Dave, what you said is that we have funds in the operating budget to support the design work. I don't know the scope of all the design work. You referred to studies, et cetera. I just want to reiterate. So within the operating budget, we can support the design work. That's the statement we're ready to say.
That's correct.
Okay. All right.
Great.
Thank you, Alice. Brian?
I wanted to make a comment. So Matt had said that one of the concerns was that solar was a hidden cost for the school. I think that's the wrong view of this. This is the light plant fulfilling on the clean energy goals that it has using the site that's available at the middle school. This is not, this is like the landfill, but just happens to be, instead of on top of trash, it's on top of a school. This is part of what Concord Light is doing based on Article 51 and other efforts where we are supplying clean electricity to the town with in-town solar when possible. So I would push back against the idea that this is a way to hide cost for the middle school.
Well, I think that's part of the intent of a statement like this is to exactly make the kind of point you just did. Assuming it's the will of the board.
Yes, I think that's great. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that comment. Pam, I know your hand is there patiently waiting. So Pam.
No, thank you. And I just want a couple of things just to build on what Brian just said and supported by Matt. I think the concept of hidden cost is problematic, especially when you think of the externalities that we're really talking about in a very macro sense, and the lack of education often people have about, you know, what the true cost is of all the energy we consume. So just from a messaging point of view, I think we need to be very careful about that. I also have a question for Matt. Thank you for the information about the meeting. What level how far down do you think we should go with respect to intent? Should we just speak to our general support for solar ready? Should we send out a signal if the board agreed that, for example, we want maximal, you know, solar panels on? I mean, how far down do you think we should go at this particular meeting, Matt?
Well, I think Pam has been evidenced by this discussion. Some of what you just said has not been decided by the board, and you know, I think it's really more reiterating the commitment that to provide at least the amount of power that would make the building net zero, right? But that's, you know, the rest is to be determined. If you can go beyond that, that's wonderful, and you know, and it may make business sense as well, but that's unknown, and you know, I don't think that you need to overcommit. You just need to really put out where you are now, which is, I think, a pretty serious commitment in that you're trying to plan for, okay, how do we actually ensure that we get there and all of that. But it is a little awkward in that, yeah, it's premature to come out there and say, here's the plan, here's what we're spending, here's where it's going to be sited, here, you know, everything.
Yeah, if I may, Matt, of course not. I mean, and thank you for reminding us of that. But statements of broad intent, like, you know, net zero at least, or that every inch of possible space be used no matter what cost. Very different kinds of intentional statements. And so I really am just curious about how far we should try to find our overall 30,000 foot intent statements at this juncture. And perhaps you're saying, you know, don't do that. Just
less is more, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, again, it's critical to make a firm and serious commitment, but I don't think it's important to speculate.
Matt, I appreciate that comment. I think it's very valuable. And then Dave, can you just reaffirm for me, because it is my understanding that the solar that could be on the rooftop would allow that building to be net zero without the canopy.
Yeah, based on the feasibility piece, yes, it would be very close with the rooftop.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have a couple hands raised here. I see Amanda. I want to ask the board if there are more questions at this time before oh, sorry, can't see your little hand there. Gordon, let me have you speak to your question.
Okay, I'll just try to quickly say it. It's like, I think that there's a electrical design problem or challenge, which is like, that's what SDA can do for us. But there's also kind of a financial design or a project plan or a philosophy or so forth, where I actually feel like the board, even just what some of the words that have been used today, point in somewhat different directions for how this project can go. And I don't feel like as if we've sorted that out. And I think that, for instance, the decision whether to bond it or to go with the PPA, those are two very different directions. They both fall within the overall description of being net zero. So I think that at kind of a board level or, you know, governance level, we've got some decisions to make, and that they actually need to proceed some of the questions that we're going to propose to a design firm. So anyway, I think I I think that maybe we might need to meet more often in order to start getting our arms around this.
So I think we'll meet as we need to meet. So as soon as we have information, we should meet. I agree. Right now, we don't know enough about when that information is available. So I agree, and I'm fully committed to meeting as often as we need to do that. So I agree with what you're saying. I should also comment, I know I had some prepared generic statements that I would have otherwise made at the public hearing had Amanda not made a presentation. And I'm willing to share those in a moment if we get there. I think they speak to all these comments that you have just made about don't get into detail, don't overcommit, reaffirm our commitment to putting solar at the building. So I just want to comment that those talking points have been drafted and we can redraft them. I'm also just cognizant of time, so let me just keep going, but knowing that we're going to have those statements. So Brian, let me have you speak to your next question.
Sure. So we do need a firm statement that says we're behind this project, that we're going to put solar, but it's too early to have us having meetings to talk about the details because we don't have construction documents. So also the choice between a PPA or going out for a bond issue, the federal government could reinstitute the ITC and suddenly there's a lot of funding available through the PPA route that's not available today. It's expected to expire in 2024 or 2025 when the project is built. So if they extend it, which is likely, it changes all of the work that we do now to decide, do we do debt or do we PPA? So I think, I feel that the light plant is on course, on pace with the project to get solar installed day one. We need to, make sure that we don't miss the next milestones, but I think we're going at the right pace. There's a lot of things that we could do now that could be moot because of changes that happen closer to the installation. So I do feel the town is worried about solar not being placed on this building. And I think they're worried that some weird financial thing is going on to hide some cost. I think we need to address those today. But beyond that, I don't think we should get into detailed statements. I don't think we should do too much work in advance. I think we've got a good pace going. That's my feeling. I know it's not.
I disagree with that.
Well, so
As
can
do I disagree too, actually.
Okay.
I hear everyone's comments. So today we need to, I understand people's concerns. Matt, Brian, you did say something that I actually just want to comment on that I don't believe is the purview of the light board. And that is the comment relative to skirting any costs for the school project. Matt, I think that the school or the town needs to speak to the choice of having solar not included as part of the town building project. I don't want the light plant to be in a position to say why it wasn't included. Just for the record, I'm just going to comment because someone might raise that question.
Yeah, so my intent was that we as a board should say we're going to find the most financially advantageous route to put solar on that building. I think that's our.
Yeah, I don't want us to be in a position to speak to why it was separate. That's all I'm saying. So.
Okay, understood.
There are still some hands raised. I think I'd like to ask Amanda to speak at this time before we take citizen comments because she's part of the town. Amanda, can you, I don't know if you want to go on video or not, but share your comments.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have video right now in transit and just on my phone. So sorry about that this morning. So I wanted to make one point that I haven't heard yet, and that one benefit of doing a feasibility design was also to know that the design for the school was capable of being net zero, so that there was enough space to put all of the solar and that the capacity of that would account for the energy use of the school. And now we do know that. And I think that was a critical item that we needed to know that it was truly net zero ready, that it was actually capable of doing that. And I think on the topic of a presentation, the presentation at the public hearing worked with Dave to put that together. And Dave and I have also talked about our role at town meeting, and we'll be there for questions, but I'm not coming to town meeting with a statement, but there to answer questions. So know that I'll be there if that's helpful in answering anything that comes along that night. And also on, just to point out, if it's useful as you prepare a statement in Sustainable Concord, one of our indicators of success, or two indicators really, is the amount of town solar and the amount of battery storage. And so we have the goal for the school of being net zero, and we have these other goals that we could partially satisfy from going above and beyond what's needed to be net zero. And to me, the question of why would we go beyond the minimum that we need for the school would to meet those other sustainability goals. And again, I think that comes down to financing and all of that good stuff that's later to come. But just thought those were a few points that I hadn't heard yet.
Okay. Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate that. And I think you're right. There's sort of a fine line on how much you say at this point, though I think you're reiterating the statement rather, that the building can be net zero with solar on it, as on the roof is a good statement to reaffirm. So let me just ask the question of the board. It's 8:30. I know we still have an hour to talk about rate design. We will need to come up with statements for town meeting. I have statements that I was prepared to share with the public at the public hearing, but did not, because Amanda made comments right for the most part aligned with it. Would the board be interested in me sort of verbally reiterating those to get a flavor for what we might want to say, or would the board like to review this in some other way, or appoint someone to work with me to create that statement?
Could we hear it briefly?
Sure. Okay, so I'll read it. Okay, it obviously doesn't include our comments, but it really was. Okay, so here's 5 statements. I'll state the first one. CMLP is fully in support of leading the solar installation at the new CMS building. The installation of solar and battery storage is aligned with CMLP's strategic plan and the town's overall sustainability goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. 2, a design firm has been hired to develop design options aimed to optimize solar installation at the CMS site. 3, detailed designs for the installation will not begin until funding of the school project is confirmed. This ultimate design will need to include consideration for impact on CML's transmission and distribution infrastructure, and is expected to include battery storage, rooftop, and canopy solar. We should talk about battery. 4, assuming the school project is approved, the expectation is that solar project design will be aligned with the timeline of the school's building's detailed construction design, expected to take 1.5 years following funding approval. 5, CMLP will need to evaluate the overall financial model. The overall cost and funding of the solar project is contingent on the design and is still TBD. That was the statement at the time. Obviously, this can be tweaked. Pam?
Yeah, just quickly, I think that's excellent. I would also, I would sort of balance the cost statement with the responsibility we have to meet the goals of Article 51. So that it's not just cost, it's also that broader imperative.
Yep.
And we don't need to go into externalities and things like that, but cost is a tricky question.
Yep.
But I really would like us to say something about the concomitant responsibility we have to meet the goals of Article 51, and to have solar, increased solar capability in town for that purpose.
Yeah, I thought my first statement tried to do that, but we can tweak that. It didn't say Article 51 specifically. It said overall town sustainability goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But
I would be a little more pointed. We voted on that.
We also need to start referring to Article 51 as Concord's energy goals, which was the title, because every year there's different article numbers. It's 2017.
Yeah, exactly.
But Wendy, I think your statement was excellent.
I also think the statement is very good. I would probably like to add something when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions goals. I'd also like to at least put that in context of our commitment to addressing the existential threat of climate change, so that people understand that this is not just a random, greenhouse gas goal. It's really about addressing climate change in our community where we can do it.
Exactly.
thanks, Pam. Can I ask, I think that's great. Can I ask Alice, I'm going to put you on point. Can I work with you offline to tweak this statement, and then we could potentially redistribute it to the board, not collectively, but ask for people's feedback that would be directed back to me individually? Would the board be okay with that?
Absolutely.
I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, I appreciate this. I know this is a tricky topic at this point in time. If the board is comfortable with this, I'd like to now move on to questions from the audience. Okay. Okay. Jerry Frankel, I think your hand's been up for quite a while.
Yes. Thank you, Wendy. Jerry Frankel, 132 Jenny Dugan Road, Chair of CSEC. I want to emphasize a point Amanda made that otherwise has not come up today. And that is the town sustainability goals explicitly include goals for how much solar power is to be available on municipal rooftops by 2030. That goal is 20 megawatts. We currently, as I understand it, have about 8. So that means we have 12 megawatts we need to add to meet that goal in the next 8 years. Simple extrapolation means that's 1.5 megawatts per year. So the CMS project is a huge portion of that. And not only is that, I shouldn't say a huge, it's a small portion of that. Small because we have so much ground.
I think he's frozen.
To make up.
Jerry, we might have lost you. Go back a minute in your comments if you're able to.
And maybe turn off your video.
Yeah, that might help.
If for some reason we cannot, hello?
Yeah, you know what?
Okay, hold on.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm not quite sure, but basically I want to emphasize the point that we need to be looking at this overall goal of 20 megawatts by 2030 and not merely the CMS project. This is a necessary but not sufficient step in the direction of meeting that goal. Thank you.
Okay. Appreciate that comment. Okay, so Pamela, see your hand raised.
Thank you, Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green, Unit 4. I think that we have a great education. I thank you for all the things you said. I think we have a great educational opportunity, that the general public's idea of what the cost benefit situation is for solar and battery installations is way out of date. That the general idea is that it costs a lot of money for a little bit of greenwashing ideas. And that's no longer true. So we have the opportunity to say, as an overall thing, I think our statement should include that we'll maximize the solar and battery capabilities of the middle school, and that this is an investment for the town, not a cost, that however much it costs, it will pay off and generate income and power for the town. and that our costs will be paid back in less time than a typical mortgage pays back. For example, there's at least one town in the US that finances teacher salaries with the excess power their solar array on their school produces. I want to emphasize that the difference between just an expense and an expense that pays us back financially as well as environmentally, it's important to say, because most people don't believe that's possible yet, and they're wrong. And we can confidently say that already. Also, I would ask that the town speak with Tesla. They're committed to helping communities with both solar and battery storage and the management, grid management. In fact, they're providing grid storage battery management that's being purchased by some for-profit utilities already. The installations they've done in Australia and in various other places, the plans that Tesla's doing for managing the grid in taking over and fixing and managing the grid in Texas, it would be worth at least talking to them, I think. So please emphasize that it's not just an expense. It'll pay off financially, not just environmentally with our goal acceptance. Can you add that into your comments, Wendy?
I'm going to be cautious. I only have 2 minutes, so I have to be mindful of that and stick to the critical points. But I agree with you. This is the proper investment for the future. Absolutely. No disagreements there.
And to let the town know that that's true, because right now they think it's just an expense to make the environmentalists happy.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Court, Booth, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you. I'm not speaking for the building committee, of course. I'm not speaking for the school committee either, although the school committee chair knows I'm here and knows I'll be speaking. A couple of comments. We discussed this last night at the school committee, and this morning's meeting is vastly reassuring to me. It really addresses some of our unanswered questions, some of our concerns. One of which for me was the potential that there would be a gap in time between the building completion and the solar install. And you've addressed that beautifully today, I think. I know more clarity is going to be required and you're going to generate that, but I think you really brought us where we need to be for town meeting. Where you land on generation, whether it's rooftop and supplying 65% of the needs or so, or whether it's 150% of the needs with canopies out front. I believe the school board, can't speak for them, but I believe they're going to be receptive to what you need for ROI and all the other considerations that go into that plan that you bring forward. With a potential gap in time between construction completion and solar, what loomed large was the question, where does the interface between CMLP and the building committee stop and with the school committee start? And I think we know more today than we did yesterday on that too, and that'll be something that we address in the future. So all in all, vastly reassured that you're moving in the direction we had hoped, so that we don't have unanswered questions at town meeting that make it difficult for citizens to render their opinions. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Comments, appreciate it. Okay. I am not seeing more hands raised. This was a very fruitful conversation and I appreciate everyone's comments and thoughts on it. Is a next step. You heard the talking points. I will review that with Alice and we'll get something back out to this group like in the next day or two, so that you're all assured of that. And hopefully we move forward and we have a positive vote for town meeting next Thursday. So All right, with that, then I think we are ready to move on to our final agenda item, which deliberately was the last agenda item outside of comments, to talk about rate reviews. So again, as I mentioned, this is going to be an ongoing topic for the next couple of months around our goal of educating the board around, not that we don't know them, but it's helpful to get grounded and reminded about our rate structure. And as we go through them, have an open discussion and dialogue around where we knew there might be enhancements needed, keeping in mind or an eye to the future around time of use rates. We are not going to go into detailed design discussions today. The goal is to get re-educated on current state and move forward on additional topics in the future. And I'm sorry, someone was speaking, but I did not see who that was. Dave, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think
I
that
think it
was
was
just an unmuted person by accident.
Okay, all right, just checking I didn't miss something. Okay, so with that, Dave, I don't know how we want to, who wants to lead the discussion around rate review. The board was given the link to our existing rates, and we have in the last 2 months reviewed several of those rates, but we didn't go through the detailed design of the rates. So how do we want to proceed at this point, Dave?
So I think, you know, when we spoke about this, one of the things that you were looking for is a little bit of the history on the rates to start the conversation. So if that's what you guys are looking for to start, we can do that. That's what that was my impression anyway.
Let's start there. Yep.
Okay. So obviously there's a lot of rates. They've been reduced in the years past. We had many more, but as part of the conversation for rates and moving forward, you know, we need to look at where we were, where we've been, and that way you guys can understand where we want to go. I think probably, Wendy, you alluded to this, it's going to take multiple meetings to talk about this, but I think the history of the rates is important. I think we can probably start with residential. That would be a good first step. See if we can get through that. And then that's going to be the biggest lift, I think, on this, because we, you know, our intent is to go to time of use with residential. And that's a drastic change from where we are now. But that is the flavor of the board. So in terms of the residential rates, you know, when I said the rates were pretty much, you know, a flat price, and, you know, we were promoting people using electricity and you got a discount if you used X amount. And, you know, obviously the philosophy changed over the years, and probably what, 12 years ago, we modified the residential rates. We put in block rates to try and promote conservation. So a 3-tiered system. And that's been in place for quite a while now. The idea was the more you use, the more you pay. And it was trying and promote conservation. I don't know that that was effective. I don't believe it was. We haven't seen what we thought would come from that. The idea at the time was to kind of follow the block rates that the water had implemented. And that was kind of the backing behind it. And at this point, they're still in place. And that's still what we use. But like I said, I don't think they really truly promoted conservation like we thought they would. So something we learned along the way. I think the big component that we haven't spent time on is the fixed charge, the meter charge. We've gone up, and you know, a few years ago we presented a process. You know, we went from 6 to 9 to 12 to 16, but you know, it's kind of stalled at that point. And that's something I think the board needs to be talking about more, is putting more in that component. And you know, when we went with the last increase on that charge was a challenge for the board, right? And it took a while to come through, but that's something that I think really needs to be focused on, because as we're promoting more solar and whatnot, our revenues are dropping. And, we're not covering all our costs through the variable piece. So that's something I think the board needs to focus on and discuss. And then, as we transition over to the time of use, there's going to be a lot of conversation on how we do that and what type of time of use rate do we have? Is it multiple blocks? Is it just on peak, off peak? We have some ideas. Laura and I have talked about them, but that's kind of, I think, where we're heading. And to me, that's the first part of the discussion on rate philosophy, is to focus on the residential piece. In terms of going to the commercial side and doing time of use, I think that's going to be a separate discussion, because that's going to be much more difficult for us to, actually have success with commercial customers that the businesses run during the day, and they can adjust their usage. So that's kind of what I wanted to lay out in terms of that, and kind of start talking about the residential side of things.
So, Dave, I know the fixed rate has been an issue for a long time. And at one point, there was a quote that it should go up as high as $70. I'm not sure that we're ready to do that. I believe that every year in the last few years, we've been increasing it. And even just November, we increased it 5%. Right. So just a comment that we've had this sort of slow and steady approach to increasing that fixed rate, in part because we know time of use rate was coming and we didn't want rate shock on that. But I absolutely agree that that needs more conversation. And I think we need to revisit what is that true fixed cost that we need to, what is the target that we should be aiming for? 70's high. I think there's a recognition also that we need to understand the marketplace a little bit too. Because I think at the time we acknowledged that the highest fixed rate we saw was around 40. But I think to that point, these are the topics that we want to dive into a little more deeply in subsequent meetings as well. So, and I'm seeing a couple hands raised. So let me jump in. So Gordon, comment?
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. When I was chair, I led a very detailed examination of some of these issues. And I feel like as if everything that was learned and all of the analysis that was done at that time is being cast aside. And I may be in the minority on this, but some of the insights that I learned from spreadsheet analyses that Laura did for us at that time was that the block rate system that's in place currently directs that removing the block rate design would impact the bills of the smallest, the lower users significantly. So, I'm hearing slogans and or maybe philosophical terms being thrown around. You could use terms like equity or flat rates or simplification or some of the conflicts between, say, promoting use versus trying to promote conservation. I heard a statement, David just made a statement a second ago that we know now that block rates don't encourage conservation. I mean, that's an assertion. I don't really know where that comes from. I'm saying it's a big complex thing, and just throwing one little fact at it doesn't actually, it's not that simple. So here's the thing. I'm going to be off the board soon. So if you guys remember anything from my tenure here, it's that if you flatten the block rates, okay, you are going to raise the rates for a lot of people. And if you want the details, you can go back to the spreadsheets that we worked on back then. I saw, Brian, you disagree with that. It's a fact that there are a small number of very high payers who, if you lowered their rates back down to the median and raised everybody up you'll have to raise everybody else's rates up too. So that is a matter of how we as a community want to, what's fair and what's appropriate. And I don't think that's it's not a decision that you can just make based on some checkoffs. It's like, oh, is it good for the environment or whatever? It's like, do we really want to substantially raise the rates for the smaller bill payers in the town? And that includes raising the meter charge too. Let me also say that there's a conflict or between or there's a kind of skepticism about solar, and are the people that are that have solar, have rooftop solar, are they somehow benefiting at the expense of everybody else? And I would just say that if you raise the meter charge, then you need to bring down the solar distribution charge. We haven't done that. That's a matter of equity. And so, look, I'm just saying, let's not rush into this. I don't think it's a simple matter of like simplifying rate design or giving up on conservation. I'll tell you one other thing is that conservation continues to be a goal. I mean, we're trying to green our supply by buying wind and solar. Well, those come in discrete chunks. And anytime we exceed that, we have to go out to the market. Now we're getting fuel, power from basically natural gas. So, if we can provide incentives so that people don't exceed, then that actually helps keep us within the limits of the power that we've contracted through PPAs. So anyway, that was a big speech. Thank you for listening to me. I just hope that we don't rush into something without giving up something that I've spent a lot of time and the past committees have spent a lot of time on trying to ensure that we've got a fair system that really works for the vast majority of the people in town.
Gordon, thank you for your comments. So, part of this grounding discussion is to remind everyone of all these issues. So I appreciate your comments. I don't think we're rushing into anything. I'll just comment that Pam and probably Alice were not here at the time that we had some of those detailed discussions. So it's important that we raise these concerns and keep them in the forefront, okay? We're not making any design decisions right now, but we need to be reminded these are all important aspects. So I don't think we're saying we're having a flat rate, and I don't think we're going to improve change the fixed rate immediately. This is all a board discussion, and revisiting our philosophies, like, is the conservation still our goal? That's counterintuitive to increasing EV usage, where we're going to increase usage. So again, it's a balancing act, right? This is a complex topic, so it's going to take a long time to get through this, and we're going to have to make some tough decisions. So absolutely. So, and all of you need to contribute and play a role in that. So Brian, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I want to say thanks for reaffirming that we're not making decisions today. We're having discussions. We're understanding why things are the way they are so we can analyze them and make decisions on what we want the future to be. It doesn't mean that suddenly we're going to have rate shock and we're going to transition to something like a $70 meter fee tomorrow. We need to know where we're going through this analysis so we can make a transition plan over the next few years. So the reason I shook my head at the tiered rates, Gordon, is two reasons. You said that it would be a big burden on the lowest paying ratepayers. The difference is a penny a kilowatt, or $6.50 a month. If we were to have the middle tier, the average be for all kilowatts. So it does have an impact, but we need to quantify what that impact is so we can have real discussions about how we want to change that, because there are negative effects of having this tiered structure. I've talked to many people who didn't do an EV or a heat pump because they didn't want to hit that upper tier. That is going against what this board is trying to do. So that's why I don't like it. I also, there's a heat pump rate that is solely to avoid this problem. So we have an additional rate that we have to administer with sub-meters because we have tiers in this rate. So we need to have these discussions to talk about all the pros and cons of the method in which these rates are structured, such that we can see their unintended consequences and their benefits. So that's really why I want to have these discussions, because the tiered system is from 2009. It is a conservation effort, but our philosophy over the last decade in Concord has changed to one of, we're going to supply clean electricity we're going to supply clean energy through electricity, and try to change the fuel switching from transportable fuels like oil and gas over to electricity because we can clean it. Conservation efforts like this tiered structure are counter to those efforts, and we need to acknowledge that. Do we need to protect our low consumers or our low income customers? Absolutely. But let's do that in the residential assistance rate and have the mechanisms within this rate focused on the greater community, the 80%. So I want to get us back on to discussing other components. So for example, the transmission charge is 5 cents per kilowatt, plus we have a very high meter fee. This is because of the Baker-Tilly study that moved some of the power supply into distribution collection. I disagree with that move, but that's where you get numbers like that $70 meter fee instead of a $30 meter fee, is changes like that. So I want to get into looking at what are the light plant expenses, how are those expenses calculated based on our behavior, how are we collecting for it, what financial signals are the customer receiving, and is that creating a positive feedback loop in lowering expenses and lowering rates, or is that creating a negative feedback loop where we're giving mixed signals and people are making investment decisions based on a rate structure that is conservation focused rather than fuel switching, to clean energy focused. So I'm going to let Dave or anyone who has questions go back to their plan for this discussion, but I want to make those comments. Thanks.
I appreciate those comments. Part of our goal today is to identify the issues that this board wants to review going forward. And you did reference the Baker-Tilly study. Remember, we have a financial obligation, and the goal of the cost of service study was to align our cost to our rates. And so, we did that in a number of areas, but there were gaps where we didn't fully achieve some of those goals. And I think that gets into some of our specialized rates that we have. And I don't know that we're prepared to talk about all those right now, but I do know that the ETS rate was one that needed some further review and discussion for sure. When I don't know, Laura can probably remember off the top of her head where the other areas were. Obviously we're gonna have to talk about net metering in that design philosophy. It's got a very unusual kind of rate, the way it's created as well. And so I don't know if one of the things we need to do is to go into in a future meeting, a more detailed discussion about some of those rates and what was behind it. And to your point about what kind of messages are we sending on those rates. I don't know if they're positive or negative, and I don't even know how we assess some of that as well. So, Dave, do you want to comment?
Yeah, well, I think some things that need to be discussed as we move forward is as we transition to a time of use rate, whatever that's designed as, what happens with those special rates, right? And that's going to be a lengthier discussion that the board's going to need to have. Do we keep them or not? And that's going to be a difficult conversation because, we've heard from the ETS customers over the years We have a net metering rate right now. What do we do with that? Do we keep it? Do we change it? So these are all discussions that the board's going to need to have, and it's going to take time. And if history is an indicator of how much time it takes to go through some of these different conversations, it's going to take multiple meetings, right? So I just wanted to point that out.
So, Dave, I think moving to time of use is one thing. I think maybe in future meetings, we have some dedicated time to talk about these rates specifically. I think residential in general, we can understand, but maybe the ETS and net metering, and if there's another rate, we should talk about those two. We could plan to dive deep. Again, understanding and getting grounding and educating on what the rates are today, I think it would be valuable.
Yeah, I think we need to be talking about rates at every meeting going forward.
Yep.
And there's a lot to cover. And so we're really going to have to, strategically focus on the approach, residential, then do we do special? How do we go about that? And as we get closer to a time of use, the other piece that's going to be, I think, important is what do we do for an opt-out, right? So what is the opt-out rate? Is it what we currently have? Is it something else? All things that are very important as we move forward.
Alice, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to say, in preparation for the meeting, I did review all of the rate sheets that we had up on our website. And it was clear that we had added rates and redesigned as we went along to meet an immediate pressing need. As conditions have changed, whether it was a solar rate or a ETS rate, as technologies came, we've changed our rates. I think this is a fabulous discussion for us to go back and figure out, are we meeting the current interest of the board and the philosophical interests that we have in greenhouse gas reductions? All of those things need to be integrated. And even I look at the rates, there are lots of inconsistencies between them. So I think it's a fabulous conversation for us to have. I'm excited to begin it. And I think you're right, it'll take a meeting, a concerted discussion over a longer period of time to basically come all on the same page about why are we even looking at these rates and what do we need to do. So I really appreciate this. Thank you, Wendy.
Laura has had her hand up for quite a while, Wendy.
Laura.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Wendy. Just two things I would hope to comment on. The first is I would encourage board members who may be very steeped in the details of rates and perhaps have done their own analyses from mentioning figures in these board meetings, because I think what happens is people sometimes remember what was said and they're not always correct. So when we do talk numbers, let's have some data in front of us that we're relying on before we actually make comments, about what the fixed charge includes and doesn't include and what the level would be. I just think that would be helpful so we don't misremember. And then the second thing is, just from my perspective, I would say there are 4 big issues with respect to the residential rate that the board needs to focus on. Number 1 is, do we do away with the tiers? And Gordon's brought an excellent, opposing viewpoint of why you may not want to do away with the tiers. There is an impact from the highest users right now who do pay, the 19-cent rate. If that's done away with, they'll all pay the lower rate, which means the lower users are going to have to pay more. Exactly how much more that is, let's do the analysis and have it in front of us again. But so number 1, do we do away with the tiered rates? Number 2, what do I want to make number 2? 2 would be, do we continue with load control? Okay, right now, CMLP actually pulls the levers on people's water heaters and ETS units. And those customers are basically compensated for allowing CMLP to do that because there's value to us, okay? If we eliminate all those special use cases in favor of time of use, the value of that load control may not continue to be passed on to customers. And how will that impact whether they want to continue to allow us to do that? So do we continue load control or do we switch everything to time of use? Number 3 is solar net metering. And whether there's currently a subsidy passing from non-solar customers to solar customers and how we might want to eliminate that. And number 4, which hasn't been discussed yet, is should there be a demand fee on residential customers and what is the appropriate level of that fee? So those 4 big topics, I think are really in need of consideration by the board. Thank you.
Laura, could you write those for us so that we remember those 4 big items as part of our strategic thinking going forward? I think you encapsulated that incredibly well. That's great.
And can I just, as a new board member, Laura, either I probably should meet with you separately, or if you could give a extremely brief summary of what, especially for example, load control, I'm not very familiar with. I mean, but if in your little write-up, if you could just do a very, very short, like 1 or 2 sentence synopsis of the more of some of the stuff, or I can just get in touch with you on.
So I'll do my best to get as much information in a succinct format as I possibly can. It probably would be helpful, Pamela, to do a verbal conversation, because that way, you get to ask questions and get immediate feedback about like where it's not making sense to you and where more information needs to be provided. Whereas if I just do a write-up, I'm sort of writing in the blind, not necessarily knowing what you don't know.
Yeah, let's do that. That's great. You're a great teacher. I know that from prior experience.
Thank you.
Laura, can I just ask a question? So the Baker-Tilly study, I believe, raised many of these concerns and questions that you've raised as well. So would it be beneficial for the board to go back and revisit some of the specific recommendations in that study?
It would. However, I recognize that's a big lift. The report is, with the tariff sheets, like 100 pages. So I think it would be helpful for CMLP. Maybe we can take excerpts out of the report and frame it in sort of a higher level so that you guys don't have to wade through 100 pages to try to find the kernels of what you need to think about. So yes, anyone who's got the temperament for it absolutely would gain a ton of knowledge if they read through that report.
We all went through it. So, but if you're finding the balance, if you can cut and paste through there, I'm sensitive to the ask of you of sort of providing education. So if you can find that balance and leverage that information, that's great. I appreciate it. Gordon, I see your hand raised, and Brian too.
Just briefly, I'd caution the board, if you go back and consult and read the Baker-Tilly study, where it discusses what the proper setting of the solar distribution charge, that was not an analysis. That was just an assertion. They said, the light board asked me to increase the rate, so I did it. There's no underlying analysis there. So I think that if you can't use that document as a guide for decision about net metering policy.
I wasn't suggesting it would. I'm just suggesting their issues are raised there that are fruitful for review. Brian?
I think that for these discussions, we have to establish a time period in which we're talking about, because what happens in these discussions is we start to get selective about timeframes and current rates, which are constantly changing and so forth. So I suggest the Baker-Tilly study had a time frame, I believe it was 2018, where it had all the expenses, what we paid. It was all the knowns of the values. And I think that I would like to ask that that be shared in some kind of spreadsheet, so that we can understand the expenses that were collected for the rates that were available and the load that went on during that time. That way we can all talk on the same numbers about the same thing, so that the methodology of our rates are what we're working on, not arguing is $70 correct or $30 correct.
Fair. We should talk about what the methodology is for measuring it, right? So, good comment. And some of that information is in the Baker-Tilly study at the rate level. So, okay, good comments. I'm just gonna, it's 20 past the hour. I think this has been a good discussion. I see one more hand raised. I'll entertain that question in a moment. But I think we're going to continue to have these conversations, and all your comments are helpful. I'll work with Dave to sort of prioritize some agenda items for our next meeting. But obviously, this conversation is going to be an ongoing conversation. So again, not making decisions today, but getting grounded on what we need to educate ourselves about. So thank you. Okay, Pamela, comments?
Thank you, Pamela, 13 Concord Green. Can we make, and also a list of things that we would like to incentivize, like residential solar installations, like adoption of electric vehicles, like heat pump installations, like conservation of electricity, and things we want to disincentivize, such as gas heat, large usage of electricity for large unnecessary usage. And because sometimes the things that we want to incentivize are contradictory to each other. And we could make our policy complex enough that we find ways of balancing what would be contradictory. Like at the same time, we want to incentivize switching all of our energy use to electricity, but we also want to incentivize conserving electricity. Well, what the electricity is used for might be a way of changing that. We want time of use rates where we disincentivize the use of rates of electricity at times when it's most expensive. But that's not possible for people that are all electric, say. If we had a list of what we want to incentivize and what we want to disincentivize, I think it would help in our rate discussions.
I think you raise a good comment. I think, there's a larger philosophy in our goals that the Light Board needs to address first, and then the details fall out from there. But good comments. Brian, can I ask you to be quick? I want to make sure we get to liaison topics as well. Thanks.
It's important that electricity be inexpensive. And the best way to do that is through cost causation in our rate structure, meaning that we're collecting for the expenses and the way they're incurred so that there's an alignment between when the customer saves on their bill, Concord Light saves on their bills. If we get that alignment right, the clean energy source for Concord becomes cheaper. And that makes it more attractive for all of these efforts. So rather than being, let's support this technology or that technology, I think it's more important that we get cost causation within our rate structure so that we can say, when you're paying this fee on your bill, it's paying this expense at the light plant. Oh, we have a load control system to help you lower your bill. That's why you should participate, because when you save money, we save money. Today, with the average customer in the R1, that does not exist.
Thank you, Brian, good observation. I'd like to move on. I know to liaison and public comments. Gordon, you've been participating in the other committee. I'm going to defer your comments to the next meeting, if that's okay.
No, please, Wendy, I have one request.
Okay.
Okay, and that is that it would be really helpful to the task force if we could get some input from town staff about what the nature of 52 addresses or 52 streets that don't have service. I can send the list to David and Greg, and we just like to get a better idea of why those don't have service.
That's fine, Gordon. You can send that to us. Send it to Greg and myself.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I didn't realize that you had something to request. So, so Dave, Appreciate you following up on that. Is there anything else, Gordon, relative to the committee that you're looking information about?
I just say that generally speaking, what we're trying to do is we've got a current plan. I don't think that'll cover all the cases, and we're trying to bring in some suggestions and so forth for covering the areas in town that are not served, particularly trying to come up with some ideas for condos and things like that.
Great, thank you. All right, so I am going to open up the floor for public comment. And I'm not seeing any hands raised. I think that's just me. So without any comments being requested, then I think I can entertain a motion to close the meeting. Someone like to make a motion?
I move that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
I think that was Alice. Yes, okay. All right, so we'll make a roll call. Brian?
Yes.
Alice? Yes, okay. Gordon?
Yes.
All right, Pam?
Yes.
All right, and Wendy's a yes. All right, so thank you all. This was a great conversation. Just a reminder, we'll distribute back out to the board talking points that we would expect to provide at town meeting. So thank you all. Good discussion. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Wendy. Thank you for an excellent leading of the meeting.
Well, thank you. All right, well, have a great week, everyone. We will see you.
Yes, thank you, Wendy.
Thanks.
Bye.